this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is a video to compare two Razer Viper mice, the Razer Viper Ultimate, seen here in black, and the controversial Razer Viper V2 Pro, seen in white. The reason it's controversial is it's expensive, and yet has seemingly dropped a number of the features that were present on the Viper Ultimate, and done so in order to shed weight. So the Viper V2 Pro comes in at around 59 grams for the white one, 58 for the black version. Yes, there's a slight difference in weight depending on what colour you choose, and that is versus the 74 grams on the Viper Ultimate. So the goal here is to shed a number of different features in order to make it more lightweight. Now the Viper Ultimate was interesting for a number of different reasons, and I'll show you those as we go through this video. It had 8 programmable buttons, which the Viper V2 Pro has dropped to 5, and it also had a interesting design that included some nice grips on the outside. It had a charging pin set up, so it had its own charging dock, and a number of other highlights that made it interesting. It had a 20,000 max Dpi sensor, 650 IPS, 50 Gs acceleration, and optical switches. The Viper V2 Pro has dropped the grippy side, so you'll see a close look at it here. So it no longer has grips on either side of the mouse, but it does have a matte finish on it, so you can see this matte finish on the edges and around the mouse shell. That makes it comfortable to use, but obviously ditches some of the grippiness of the Viper Ultimate. However, they do include some grip tape in the box, so if you want to add in some extra weight to the mouse, make it a touch heavier but perhaps easier to hold on to if you have particularly slippy hands, then you do have some grip tape included for both the switches and for the sides as well, so you can add a little bit of weight but make it grippier. I will, however, say that I did find during my review that it was comfortable enough to hold on to without that grip tape. Now they've done all this in order to shed some weight from the mouse, so it weighs in at 59 grams compared to the 74 on the Viper Ultimate, and they've done this in a number of different ways. So they dropped the RGB lighting off of the mouse. It no longer has charging pins, so you can't use a charging dock with it. It doesn't have right hand thumb buttons, so there's not 2 side buttons on the right hand side. And all of this is in order to shed 16 grams of weight and make it more lightweight. So initially it might seem like you're losing quite a lot of different features, some of which are quite nice, and I'll talk about those a bit more later on, in favour of shedding weight. But actually there are some hidden highlights to the Viper V2 Pro, and I personally actually quite like it. For example, it has a 30K max optical sensor, so it goes up to 30,000 dpi, which is insane, but it does mean that it has high accuracy. It also has 750 IPS max speed, 70 Gs acceleration, 5 programmable buttons, optical switches Gen 3, they're guaranteed up to 90 million clicks, so they're nice and responsive that way, and that's upgraded from the Viper Ultimate, which has only had 70 million clicks in it as well. So there's a number of upgrades there, and I'll leave the specs of both in the description so you can find out more. But what you will see is that it basically comes with a 2.4 GHz HyperSpeed dongle, an adapter, and a USB-C charging cable. So it does have USB-C, and that is one of the differences between these two mice, is that it has USB-C charging, which makes it easier to plug in when you need to. There's also been a slight increase in battery life, so it has 80 hours of battery life versus the 70 hours on the Viper Ultimate. Both of those battery lives are very good, and I found that I didn't have to plug in either mouse very often, which is obviously a benefit. But you can see the differences here already in terms of specs and features, and the Viper Ultimate was interesting because of those features, so it's sad to see them gone. So you'll see, for example, that it comes with this little charging dock. You can purchase it with a charging dock which has 2 metal pins on it, and on the underside of the mouse there are recesses in there where those pins connect to. So basically when you're not using the mouse and it's needs a charge, so if you're stepping away from your PC, you can put it onto that dock and then it will charge up. This means that you don't need to worry about plugging it in at any point really. As long as you remember to dock it, then it will do the charging for you and it'll be ready to go next time you need it. On the underside there was also a storage point for the 2.4 GHz wireless dongle. Now whether you actually use this or not, or whether it matters, obviously is a personal thing. I like to see it, but isn't really something I would use that often. If you're using the mouse and taking it with you regularly, then it might be useful. And also you also see that you have a Dpi switching button and a power button as well. So a lot of the things have changed under here. Now both mice have PTFE feet obviously, but the the Viper Ultimate is slightly different because it has RGB lighting and the extra side buttons and also the dock and other things. So it has RGB lighting on the logo. This is another thing that's been ditched from the Viper V2 Pro, so there's no longer any RGB, so no chroma and no RGB lighting of any sort on the Viper V2 Pro, but on the Ultimate is where you had it. And you can see on the underside of the Viper Ultimate 20,000 max DPI, so it doesn't go as high in DPI, it doesn't have as good mouse switches, it doesn't have as long a battery life as the V2 Pro, so there are a number of sort of hidden improvements in terms of the specs with the Viper V2 Pro that make it better than the Viper Ultimate, but that's not immediately obvious. And obviously the appeal of the charging dock on the Viper Ultimate is certainly one that's nice. However, I will note that I did say during my initial review that I'll link to in the description, that I found this thing really fiddly. It's really fiddly and difficult to get a hang of. It's quite a faff to get it to dock properly. It is, however, very convenient. But one of the things that you'll notice is obviously that the Viper V2 Pro has a flexible USB-C charging cable. So they've ditched micro USB that was on the Viper Ultimate in favor of USB-C. So it's a lot easier to plug in and to charge when you need to, but you never have to plug the Viper Ultimate in theory, as long as you remember to dock it. So it's a personal thing whether that's going to bother you or not, but it's nice to have both of them in different ways. Obviously USB-C is a joy because it's much easier. You also have the little adapter extension dongle that you can basically put on your desk, and then you can plug your dongle into that for a better signal and then easily unplug the cable if you need to and plug it in for charging purposes. On the Viper Ultimate, you also have the same sort of logic with the charging dock. You'll notice on top of that as a USB port. You can plug your wireless dongle into that and then remove the cable and plug it into your mouse when you need to. You will, however, notice that it's micro USB instead of USB-C, and it is marked which direction you need to plug it into, but it makes it a little bit more fiddly to plug in, and I know some people absolutely hate micro USB, and that's a thing that would stop them buying a mouse entirely. And you can see the process for plugging it in here isn't quite as simple. It's a little bit more fiddly and perhaps a little bit more frustrating, but I think it's worth it in terms of the charging dock trade-off that you've got there. So there are quite a few different things going on here, quite a few differences between the two mice, and I will say there are some things that are also not immediately obvious when you're comparing the two that make the Viper V2 Pro preferable to me. For example, they have made it so that the side buttons on the mouse jut out more. Now, one of the complaints I had with the Viper Ultimate is that the buttons on the side are quite recessed. They're not that easy to press. You can see them here from these shots that they're sort of slick and recessed into the mouse. I'll leave some of these comparison shots at the end so you can hear the difference in the switch clicks. But what I found is that it's just not easy to press them. However, that was beneficial because when they're on both sides, it could be far too easy to accidentally actuate both sides of the mouse. It did, however, have the benefit that you also had the option to use it in left or right hand, depending on whether you're ambidextrous or if you're a left or right-handed gamer. Obviously now the Viper V2 Pro is very much for right-handed gamers only, which is obviously a shame. And I do, however, much prefer the side buttons on the Viper V2 Pro, much more comfortable in that way. So there you have it, that's my personal opinion on these two mice and the differences between them. I personally feel that the Viper V2 Pro is better, however it is really expensive for what it is. You've lost a lot of the external features, but you do have a lot of nice specs under the hood. It has been also wonderful to game on. I'll leave links to both the reviews in the description so you can find out more of what I thought of both these mice. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Stick around to hear the sound test. Thanks for watching.